Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's news roundup. Sorry for being MIA last week. I caught a nasty bug. You may still hear some remnants of it during this recording. Apologies in advance. But I am back to tell you everything that's been happening in the world of tabletop gaming. And quite a bit seemed to have happened over these last 2 weeks. So let's get right to it for this week of April 22nd, 2024. Our first story is gotta be the winners for the American Tabletop Awards for this year. Now, they've been announcing winners starting back when they were created in 2019, each one designing in one of their 4 categories: early gamers, casual, strategy, and complex, with it mostly being more about the difficulty, I would say, and heaviness of the game, rather than being specific like, oh, this is a strategy game versus a game being with lots of bits and pieces. So think of it more about the heaviness of the game rather than a attribute like deck building or party game. So starting off, let's look at early gamers, and that one is going to Blob Party, which I actually just played this year. This is a party game when your goal is to work together and become one blob. You do so by answering questions, trying to get similar answers. If your answer matches someone else, you combine into one blob, trying to make it so everyone eventually combines, like I said, into one cohesive blob. This is one of those fun party games that are all about trying to be in sync with the other players, and it is definitely an easy style of game to bring to any kind of party. Honestly, I understand why it's in early gamer, as it's something that I think it's very easy and quick to understand, but I can promise you, as someone who brought not exactly this, but a similar style game to a bachelor party I recently attended, these will go off no matter the age group, so not surprised that this style of gaming won the award. Next up, we've got Sea Salt and Pepper. This is a push your luck style game of collecting sets and deciding whether you want to end the round and score there, or see if you can go a little bit farther, hoping you can make a better hand than your opponents. The cards, of course, also have special abilities as well, so there'll also be a give and take of keeping things for points or using the cards for their abilities. I have not played this one, but I've only heard time and time again how this game tends to sell off the shelves quite quickly, so I am once again not surprised to see it here as an award winner. Then for strategy games, we have Thunder Road Vendetta. This is from Restoration Games, which you know means it's from an older game being brought back to modern gameplay senses. This case, this was a remake of the 1986 Thunder Roads game. This is a racing style game in a Mad Max style environment, meaning you're going to have tons of guns firing, exploding cars and helicopters, and of course, just chaos ruling over the roads. Finally, for complex, we've got The White Castle. This is a heavy Euro game in which you will need to balance tending the garden, defending the castle, as well as trying to progress up the social ladder and rub shoulders with the daimyo. I have not had the chance to actually see or play this game, but I have seen signs and just talk about it in a lot of different places, so obviously with this winning the Complex Game Award, it's probably a game I need to check out. But congratulations to all the winners here, and if you want to know more about these games or the nominees these games went up against, you can check out the American Tabletop Awards website, where they list everything there really clearly, as well as maybe check out previous year's nominees and winners as well. Over the last few years, live play sessions of RPGs starring professional comedians and actors have risen to prominence and popularity, with this story being about Dimension 20, probably second only to Critical Role in terms of that popularity. This all starts with a new live show announced at Madison Square Garden. Now, they've been doing some live shows before, though I believe the last time they said they were in New York, it was in a small venue that only fit 200 people, which they had a hard time trying to fill up. Granted, this was much earlier on in their career. That said, this is still Madison Square Garden, so they thought at the very least that while things may sell pretty well, that it wouldn't be something like, Taylor Swift with everyone freaking out and spending their entire day just to try to get in line in the queue to get a ticket. Well, it turns out they did pretty well in terms of popularity, but unfortunately that came with a bit of a monkey's paw in the form of digital algorithm that, well, no one but the ticket sellers knew about. It seems that the program that, well, let's be honest, they probably were forced to go through because that's how ticket sales work now, with Ticketmaster probably owning everything when it comes to ticket sales, has something known as dynamic pricing. So when everyone went online to try and buy tickets for the show, they noticed this huge surge and the dynamic pricing kicked in. What this does is basically increase the value of tickets because there's a demand. So these tickets, which they set at a value that I assume was much more reasonable based on a little bit later in the story, I think it was probably closer to $50 around there. All right, now on average, most people are paying, they say the average is $200, but some seats, when you look online, are bouncing between $1,500 to $2,000. Obviously, as soon as Dimension 20 heard about this, they asked, hey, please turn off the dynamic pricing. This is not what we want. But at this point, most of the tickets are already sold. That said, though, to their credit, Dimension 20 has stated, one, they're making sure dynamic pricing will not be in any more of their ticket sales, be it for this show or future shows. They don't like it. They don't think that's fair at all. And it prices people out way too fast for not a good reason. Second, they're looking at what they're doing in the future for ticket sales is that you would enter a lottery, which if you win, you have the chance to buy 2 tickets for $35, which is why I believe their initial assumption would be the tickets would sell much closer to a $50 price. But like I said, I actually haven't found anyone talk about initial pricing because I think no one actually saw that. Just the pricing just jumped up too fast. So they want to make it so it's much fairer. The prices stay much more consistent and solid. So you aren't surprised when you're going through the checkout lane and all of a sudden your ticket, has jumped up 4 times its value if you're lucky. Either way, I think this is more another condemnation on how tickets are sold for these kinds of events rather than the people behind this. I mean, can you blame them for not asking about whether the tickets are going to fluctuate in price? I don't know how much they have a right to set the price, but at the very least, the dynamic thing is just not something that, at least I would be shocked to find anyone besides Ticketmaster fans, which I don't think there are many, besides the shareholders, would be excited about. So if you didn't hear about this till now, I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure most tickets are sold. If not, they're at very high prices. Otherwise, probably keep an eye out. Like I said, it seems to be in the future. They're going to do a lottery system. So rather than making sure that you are there the day the tickets are on sale at the exact time, otherwise you have to spend 5 times, you just need to make sure that you enter the lottery before whatever the due date is. So also, well, randomness, and you might not get the tickets, but it also is a bit more fairer for those, one, price-wise, and two, who just might not be available at that specific perfect moment of when the ticket sales are open. So let me know if you were one of the people who were lucky enough to get your hands on a ticket at a much more fair price. And if so, what was that price? If it was or closer to the average right now, around 200, or were you able to actually get to much whatever the initial value for these tickets were? Now on to some business acquiring news. First off, we've talked about plenty of times Asmodee and some other companies that were just trying to acquire more and more companies, becoming bigger and larger. And we may get back to Asmodee and some of the repercussions of that. It does seem, though, we have a new challenger in the ring. Earlier, a few weeks ago, we talked about Goliath Games acquiring Prospero Hall from Funko, though not the game designers, basically just the rights, IPs, and I guess they already produced games. Well, I thought that was more of a one-off thing, but it seems that they have noticed how companies like Asmodee have been sort of the crown jewel in those companies acquiring lots of things, and that board games / card games are selling well, and they want to try and do that as well. They announced that they have gotten Lucky Duck Games, though unlike the Prospero Hall one, which, like I said, would seem to be more of the rights and words and items that they own, here they actually have the entire studio, and that studio will be acting autonomously and as an independent studio with, as far as I can tell, all the same people. So I don't think anyone was fired or there's changing of heads of power or whatever. So it's more of just falling under the Goliath Games umbrella. Now, I did see some interesting quotes about this. One, apparently this will make Goliath Games possibly the 3rd largest games company in North America. I didn't see anything backing that up. I am curious if that's simply number of games sold or distribution, things of that nature, like where would that fall under. The CEO of Goliath Games is quoted saying, as global game businesses, we see there are 2 major growth areas in games, adult party games and strategy games, as well as consumers and kidults, which apparently is like adults who tend to purchase things that are thought of as kids, such as toys and games, particularly are playing board games like never before. Now, like I said, I'm not surprised if you look at some of the companies we've been talking about before, like Embracer, and how their board game division has been sort of their crown jewel where everything else has sort of decayed over the last few years. I can understand the idea of wanting to increase your catalog and get more hobbyist board games in there, in addition to ones for maybe younger audiences, which makes Lucky Duck a understandable acquisition. That said, when you look at those companies, like I said, some of them are decaying. Part of that is just from trying to grow big and just get more and more. And as of right now, we're not seeing any of those signs with Goliath, but they may want to pay attention to the next story because this may be something where if you grow a bit too big, it may not end up well for you. As I hinted at in the last story, this next one is going to be about the Embracer Group. Now, I talked a little bit about how they said they were done reorganizing and that they weren't going to break apart or fire anything in Asmodee, and seemed Asmodee got off nearly scot-free when it came to their need to try and make up their $2 billion debt. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. They announced that they're going to be breaking up the Embracer Group into 3 new publicly traded companies. The first one is, well, it's Asmodee. Simple as that. Next, these are some interesting names, but then we have Coffee Stain and Friends, and finally, Middle-earth Enterprises and Friends. Now, the Middle-earth Enterprise one apparently is going to be mostly, obviously, Lord of the Rings, but also their like AAA brand games, like main console games, as well as Dark Horse, so I assume comic books and such. The Coffee Stain and Friends is going to be more indie games, as well as, they say, like smaller titles, as well as free-to-play mobile games, and Asmodee being focused on board games. From what I can tell, each of these companies will be treated separately in terms of stocks. So if you have stocks in Asmodee, you don't have stocks in all 3 of them. They're now considered 3 separate trading companies, though it also seems none of the heads of power are changing at all. In fact, I think I should have wrote down the name, but one of the major stockholders in all 3 is going to stay being one of the major voters in power. So it doesn't actually seem to be a power shift, rather just increasing more stocks, I guess. But the big news and the worrisome news is that Asmodee seems to be taking on quite a bit of debt with this. It seems that the Asmodee branch is going to be put up against a $900 million loan. And I'm a little confused with this. Once again, not a business major, but it seems like that the debt from this loan is going to be put up against Asmodee, aka they're the ones going to be left carrying for it. Now, they did say that Asmodee could obviously handle this. They think that they've handled this kind of debt before and they'll be able to make it back because they're the good money earners. But this seems to be the kind of thing of Asmodee being the best worker, the most lucrative option, being forced to carry the mistakes of the company previously made. And I saw one comparison to Toys R Us, which was one of those things where they put a lot of debt into one company and make that almost like the sacrificial lamb. And that'd be pretty worrisome if that's what's going to happen here, especially since this is their big moneymaker. However, like I said, this could be all just kinds of just like sleight of hand shuffling when it comes to businesses that I'm not as keen about. And maybe this is just something that's very par for the course. So if you're a bit more knowledgeable in these kinds of situations, I'd love to hear more from you. For now, though, we'll have to wait and see what this means, whether this will become par for the course or whether we'll actually see differences in both Asmodee and the game's releases, as well as whatever those other 2 companies, which really lazy names, I gotta say, just Middle-earth and Friends. You could have done a little bit better at least, but see what they come out with now that they've broken up into 3 different separate companies. So these next 3 stories, I just feel like I need to quickly talk about. Don't really have much to say, probably not even 30 seconds worth, but thought I should mention nonetheless. First, the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, Cynthia Williams, is stepping down. Now, from what I can tell, this is of her own volition. This is not a firing or some controversy, just deciding to no longer be the head of Wizards of the Coast and will be in full effect by the end of this month. They have not announced a new interim head nor an official head, but they have stated that they are looking for a new head for Wizards, either internally or externally. So if you have a good plan to get more money out of Magic the Gathering players, definitely see if you can get that role. Next up involves Warhammer 40k and their newest Codex for the Adeptus Custodes. I talked actually about this back in my last announcements for a new book for them. The Codex is basically a rule book for each group. The Adeptus Custodes being these giant golden warriors who stay on Earth and protect it. Well, this book has both rules and lore, and there is controversy around both. Now, the lore one is probably the one that is more upfront, just because it's one of those things that would cause a big storm on the line. You see, the Custodes are assumed to be all male, similar to the Space Marines, all lore stuff, not here to talk about, but in 2 paragraphs, they refer to a Custode as she, And now people are wondering, is this a retcon? This has always been. And then you can already guess the kind of conversation that this has brought up. And speaking of which, it seems to be blocking a bit more what I would imagine be a bit more important, and that's the rules for the custodians. This new book apparently just utterly tears apart the current way you play custodians. And I even saw one person state that this was the worst book they've seen for a faction in over 3 editions. So now the question is, did they make terrible rules to cover up for the fact that they're changing how we view custodians and gender? Or did they add the female custodians to cover up for the bad rules? Which one do you think came first? Final story, though, has been announced by Margot Robbie's production studio, Lucky Chap, that they will be making a Monopoly movie. If you don't know, these are the people who are also behind the Barbie movie, which was very successful and took a very great take on Barbie and her story. Now, there are many different ways they could take this Monopoly, be it either like Barbie in the world, quote unquote, of Monopoly, or with the actual backstory Monopoly, as there is a lot of interesting history when it comes to how Monopoly was created and its origin story. Either way, we don't know any more details besides the announcement, but something to keep an eye on, especially after the success of the Barbie movie. Let's now talk about game announcements. First thing I want to talk about is the new Pathfinder book, War of Immortals. This new book has plenty of new mythical rules, new classes such as Animus and Exemplar, and oh yeah, it talks about how the god of war, Gorum, is being killed. Yes, we talked a little bit about this. They were hinting at the idea that a major god in their pantheon was being killed off last Gen Con, so this is the actual result. And through this book, we're going to see the ripple effects of the god of war being killed off. You can pick up this book in October, but I'm sure we're going to see hints of this in all their other books that are slated for this year. Then we have a new legendary expansion from Marvel titled Legendary Weapon X. Can't guess from the title. It's all about the program that made Wolverine, so probably just a lot of Wolverine-themed cards. This is planned to be released also in October, specifically around October 30th. Now, for all you Risk fans out there, Risk 2210 AD is finally getting a reprint, this time from Renegade Game Studios. This is because Hasbro and Renegade Games made a deal when it came to Avalon Hill Games, allowing Renegade to start reprinting some of these games. Now we'll see how different it is in the newer edition, but hopefully at the very least this means you can now finally get your own copy, or at the very least not have to hunt down a secondhand one. This is planned to come out this May. Then we've got Bounty Hunter, a new Star Wars game. This is a light drafting game in which you'll be trying to be the best bounty hunter, and this is planned to be released May 31st. Then we have Little Alchemist. This is the kid version of Alchemist. It's slated for the 3rd quarter this year, so think around fall. Then this one I want to shout out because it's a little funny. It's the DC deck building game Crossover Collection 2. Basically, it's a bunch of the crossover packs from before with some promos. The big interesting thing being this one includes the Arrow crossover pack, which was initially based on the TV show. However, in here, they were replacing all the live action shots with art from the comics. So if you weren't a big fan of the live action shots mixing in your game, you can now buy this with all the other stuff maybe you already have, but you will now be able to replace it with Green Arrow comic book panels. Cyberpunk Red Combat Zone is a miniature game based in the cyberpunk world, and now they're going to add the Netflix anime Edge Runner to it. With Cyberpunk Edge Runners, this is going to be compatible, but it's its own standalone game, so you can just buy that to play this miniature game and dive deeper into the world of Cyberpunk at your table. And then for Magic the Gathering players, this is either going to be something really cool or something you're really annoyed about. They announced a crossover with Cowboy Bebop. They have multiple cards in the Cowboy Bebop style, but it's only being released in Japan. So this is planned to be apparently start releasing around April 26th. I don't know if they have a lottery system or not, but odds are if you're not in Japan to pick it up yourself, it's going to be quite a bit in order to buy these off the secondary market. Finally, though, we've got the Fallout TV show. If you haven't watched it yet, I highly suggest it. But if you already did and you really like it, they're going to be adding the characters as miniatures to both Fallout Wasteland Wayfarer and Fallout Factions. This new pack will include, obviously, Lucy, the Ghoul, Max, and the dog, which is known as CX404. You can pick up this bundle starting May 7th. But that is the news for the last 2 weeks. I'm sure there's plenty of things I missed. Let me know your thoughts on these stories or any of those things I missed. Were you one of the people lucky enough to get a Dimension 20 ticket? Or are you excited for any of the game announcements? Let me know everything you have to say down below. I can't wait to read them. But for now, thank you so much for staying tuned and sticking here with me. But that's this week's news. I'll see you next week on the News Roundup.